Welcome back. For those who missed me at the outset, I'm Kent Bonham from the PCAOB's Office of Communications and Engagement, and I'm thrilled to be here, joined for this session by board member Tony Thompson. Before we get started, once again, I'll just note that the views that Tony and I express during this session are our own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the PCAOB, individual board members, and the PCAOB staff. And just one other administrative matter before we get going. CPE is available for this session, and we'll advance to that so we can see the code there. And again, the CPE code for this session is 244. Okay, so with that, Tony, welcome, and thanks for joining us. We're thrilled to have you. For those of you who are not familiar with Tony, his service as board member or his prior body of work previous to joining the PCAOB, Tony served as an executive director and chief administrative officer of the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. Prior to that, was a senior leader at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, where he managed over 400 people and was responsible for a broad range of programs. And prior to that, was in the United States Air Force, where he served for 32 years, reaching the rank of colonel. So again, thanks a lot for joining us. I know.
Oh, my pleasure.
Looking forward to it. So let's stay with your background, I guess, for a little bit.
Sure.
And maybe if you could just talk a little bit about how that background, how your service has served you as a board member. So how has it influenced you and how you approach the job and as a PCAOB board member?
Thanks, Ken. I think I'll start probably early on. I realized pretty early that I had a tendency to gravitate towards public service in general. Probably took a little bit of a leap there and enlisted in the Air Force at a very young age, and basically spent, as you just alluded to, three decades in the Air Force. But what I want to talk about is the fact of what I learned by being in the Air Force. One, I am a mission-driven person. The Air Force mission was to, fly, fight, and win. Very short, but very powerful statement. What I've discovered is if you want to be a first-class, world-class organization, it takes tremendous investment in people. It takes investment in training. It takes investment in resources and a very high care factor about all those things. And so my leadership experience emanated from caring greatly about those things. And as I transitioned from the Air Force to USDA in the senior leadership ranks, those are the type of things that I brought with me as an executive, and like to think that I had an impact there. One of my goals is that when I'm in an organization or leave the organization, whenever that time comes, I want to leave it better than how I found it. So moving right after Dodd-Frank legislation of the financial crisis and whatnot, I found myself gravitating and interested in what was happening in the markets. And how could I best serve to ensure that the American people would never have to experience that again. So I moved over to the Commodity Futures Trade Commission. Had no idea I would be there for 10.5 years, but that was my tenure. Would like to think I had an impact there, bringing it from the agency it was pre-financial crisis, post-Dodd-Frank, to the agency it is today. And I was afforded many opportunities to make a difference there over that 10.5-year period, and I embraced that. Now come 10 months into the PCAOB, and I look at another organization with a highly public mission, investor protection, protecting the American people in another way, but still that's what it's all about. And I look at what Sarbanes-Oxley was able to do and put in place, and I think I can make a difference here as well. And I've been here 10 months, and things have been fast and furious, but it's a great place to be, and I look forward to what I'll be able to contribute moving forward.
Yeah, thanks. No, you're right. I mean, I think that working for a mission-driven organization, I think, is what inspires a lot of folks at the staff level here, getting to wear the white hat, and really try to make a difference. One of the ways the board, I know, has attempted to reinvigorate itself, recommit itself to the mission is through a new draft strategic plan.
Yes.
And although it's still in the draft format, I know that there are some priorities that you as a board and you as a board member have identified. So I didn't know if there's any of those in
Sure.
particular or just in general, if there's anything worth highlighting for folks, things that you're particularly interested in the strategic plan and the priorities laid out.
Sure. Well, I'm certainly encouraged in terms of what stage we are in the strategic plan. It was out for public comment back in the summer. We've received comments, and obviously we're sifting, through those. I think very collaborative process. Everybody's on board, with with our goal of modernizing standards, enhancing inspections, strengthening enforcement, and certainly, as I just alluded to, organizational effectiveness. Organizational effectiveness has a lot of components, but really the people side is really the driver there in terms of employee engagement and the employee experience. And so I think those are very powerful statements. That they're ambitious in terms of how we are going to operationalize it and move forward, and making it a living, if you would, living goals. One of the things I always share is that strategic plans are great, but you got to get them off the shelf,
Right.
and you have to operationalize them. And so I know people are going to be waiting. Our stakeholders are going to be waiting for us to actually operationalize that to actually show what is the impact on the mission that we have moving forward. I think it's also notable too that this is a 20th year of Sarbanes-Oxley legislation,
Yeah.
and so I was at CFTC, which was a 40-ish year in existence organization. Now I'm in an organization 20 years. So one of the things in terms of continuous improvement is you looking for maturity factors.
Yeah.
And I think this strategic plan is a great platform in terms of for us to assess where we are in our maturity model and looking forward to what we can be doing to live up to the spirit and the intent of SOX.
Yeah. No, it's great. One of the things you mentioned, I'll just pick out one of those, and then I wanted to pick up on your comment about people, because not only is it important here at the organization, but I think as you look across and making sure that the audit profession is healthy and we're conducting high quality audits, which is all of our ultimate goal, I did want to get your thoughts on sort of if you had anything about the future of the audit profession and bringing in the right people and more people as we can in the profession. So on enforcement, one of the 4 priorities you laid out, I don't know if you had any particular thoughts on that or things you wanted to emphasize or personal views.
Well, I think for enforcement, this is my 3rd organization that's been a regulator. At
Right.
USDA, I was with Food Safety and Inspection Service regulator, and I think we have an idea of what they do in terms of inspecting meat, egg, and poultry products and keeping the country safe in that way. Obviously, derivative markets at CFTC. Now here is investor protection through our inspection program, and of course, just as important, our enforcement program. And so it goes without saying that part of our strategic plan, our focus is strengthening, expanding the number of cases that we probably have historically experienced. So we probably will see more based upon violations of standards, PCAOB standards, as well as those of other regulators, to include security laws moving forward. With that, it's all about deterrence. So part of deterrence is what level of sanctions that you actually impose. So in terms of civil monetary penalties, those type of things, I think you probably and have, if you've been paying attention, seeing an increase in those as well. Until we get where we need to be, hopefully it's a continuous process. So audit quality is an ongoing, continuous sustainment effort, and certainly we would like to see audit quality across the board being much higher. So with that, there are a couple other things of note. The fact that for every violation here, in the cases we've looked at recently, there's been a 100% assessment of a civil monetary penalty for those who violated our standards. So that's something to pay attention to, and the fact that under SOX, for the first time, we're bringing alleged cases in terms of failure to supervise. So those are some dynamics that are changing. We communicate those because it is part of a thought around deterrence.
Yeah, no, it's great, and I know it will be certainly of interest to folks viewing. you did mention the importance of people, and you're absolutely right, not only within the organization here, but sort of across the profession.
Sure.
We always hear about the war for talent, and we're not the only industry, we're not the only regulator who's going through that process, but I know the audit firms themselves, large and small, are looking at the next generation, the next pool of potential auditors. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that, but then obviously a great point of pride is the fact that this is the most diverse board there's ever been. And so I did want to get your thoughts, if you had any, on sort of efforts to undertake to broaden the pool of auditors, but also reach out to the next generation.
Sure.
From more diverse backgrounds than maybe we've seen in the past. So I guess your thoughts on those two related questions.
No, I appreciate that, Ken. This last 10 months have been very enlightening to me. I'll start with the war on talent, there, and I'll go to the diversity part of that later, they both are equally important for me. What I will share is that in any environment, there's always going to be competition for the top talent that an organization needs. And if you want to be a world-class, first-class organization, through our HR processes, through our leadership, and to me, it extends beyond HR. We're all recruiters. We all have friends, families in the profession. We're all recruiting, for talent. But in the current environment, it has made us focus a lot more, looking at some areas of attrition, where there are areas where we are losing faster than we're gaining. So that makes us focus on what we have to do better going forward to be more competitive in terms of talent. And we're doing that across the board. Having Jamie McNamara, our new COO, come on board this week. I think he came on board Monday.
Yeah, Monday.
He's a great, I think, going to be a great facilitator of where we need to go in that direction to be competitive. And we all know where our competition is. In a lot of ways, it's firms. In some places, it could be other regulators, but it's those firms that we have purview over. And so I think from that perspective, we have to be extremely, extremely diligent, vigilant in that area. And we're bringing on, I think, the talent, but more importantly, giving the various division directors, managers, the tools they need to be able to recruit. On diversity, I have experienced a byproduct of what diversity means for this country. Again, I like to go back to my Air Force experience. This country gives us the best and the brightest, and I've seen it. I've lived it.
Yep.
And to see the diversity, whether it's gender diversity, diversity of race, diversity of thought, whether you graduate from Harvard or some little small college, in the Midwest, I've watched all that come together in a very, very compelling and very, very effective way. And so for me, it's not just about getting the room to look a certain way or getting the organization to look a certain way. And also conversely, I've seen what happens when everybody thinks alike, look alike, and that typically is not as efficient as people one would think. And so seeing what diversity brings to the table, so that's another area that we're focused on. When we talk externally with firms, we talk internally. We're looking for ways. I am involved in a lot of programs efforts personally to be able to bring to bear what I can bring to bear in terms of focusing on diversity. And again, it's not about the numbers in the sense of how many, it's where they are in the organization. Because that's what I've also learned over time is that, you can have a pipeline where you're bringing in diversity, but do they stay? Do they matriculate to higher positions, management positions?
And not just here at the PCAOB, throughout the profession.
That's throughout the profession,
right?
Absolutely, yeah. So again, it's not just lip service. We are doing very tangible things at the PCAOB and connecting where we need to connect, whether that's academia, whether that's also paying attention to what the firms are doing, because they have efforts, and certainly we'd like to be able to compare notes.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Bringing it from sort of big picture and focusing on, I know that matters that are of particular interest to the audience here.
Sure.
So auditors of small businesses, auditors of broker-dealers. you know, a lot of people, you talk about the profession, I think that sort of a lot of the laymen to this day sort of think of the big four,
Sure.
right? Which is understandable, but that's not the case. I mean, there is a vast diversity, again, in a different way of size and expertise, and throughout the country, we have a rigorous inspection program for what we call the triennial firms, the smaller firms, put out a lot of material for them, supporting them, but then, you know, inspection reports on them. So are there any sort of key takeaways that you have or thoughts or you might want to share with, let's start with that first, the auditors of small businesses?
I would start with back to the mission. What's the mission of the PCAOB? It's investor protection. So do you have pockets where you don't view investor protection as important? And the answer to that is no. You know, whether you're a GNF firm, you know, where you want to, among our smallest firms, it still applies. If you have investor interest at heart and there's risk, then the rules and the standards apply to everyone.
Right.
You know, I think about, you know, that family, you know, investing for their children's college education. You know, the grandparents have gotten to that point in their life, they built that 401k and they're trusting people with that 401k. And certainly the institutional investors as well. But for me, it's about making sure we have a comprehensive, you know, approach across the board. Now, one of the things we talk about in depth, and I think I heard Tim talk about it, you know, and in his presentation, is scalability. Mm-hmm. Because when we set standards, we really are focused on making sure that when you're looking at the various risk models, you know, based upon scalability, that the standards don't harm, but they help. Mm-hmm. In terms of being able to uphold this mission of investor protection, regardless of the size of the firm. The other thing is communication. Again, I think we're doing a great job with our Spotlight program, staff guidance, you know, getting it out to the, you know, the small firms. So maybe not same resources internally that a big firm has, but whatever resources we can provide in the aspect of communication, that we're sharing that with small firms, because again, the expectation is still the same in terms of upholding that investor protection mission.
Right. And then we've got, it looks about 5 minutes left, so I want to make sure we do have some questions that came in previously that we'll get to from the folks who had registered, but on the auditors of the broker-dealers, make sure they get the same treatment that we just gave the auditors of small businesses. Yes. Yes. Again, a program that was instituted with Dodd-Frank, as you said, we gave the board oversight over the auditors or brokers and dealers. We have currently shared a lot of information, at least annually, through what we call our 40/20T report, mm-hmm, which comes out, has been coming out every August. So whether it's from that document or the materials that you've seen regarding the auditors or broker-dealers at the board levels, are there any messages, key takeaways that you have specifically for those who are registered here for auditors or brokers and dealers?
Yeah, so I'll start high level and I'll get to this. So in general, audit quality has gradually improved in our inspection programs across the board. You know, there's kind of ebbs and flows. There are pockets of, you know, challenges, you know, here or there. But I think one of the things we've noticed is that even in the broker-dealer small business area, that the bottom line is that the deficiencies are going up. Now, they may shift from in various, you know, points in our history where there were more QCC issues or quality or critical criticism that we were concerned about in part 2 of the reporting and that type of thing. But overall, if you assess and score the program as an interim program, it's been effective. Now, having said that, as I just alluded to, it can be more effective. Right. But I think that the you know, the staff, our broker-dealer program since its inception is pretty much, you know, living up to, you know, what Dodd-Frank imposed in 2010 mm-hmm, in terms of the legislation. But again, there is room for improvement. Yeah. Moving forward.
Yeah, and we'll hear from them this afternoon. So sure, our broker-dealer team. So sure, more on that, but appreciate the thoughts. We do have a few minutes left. I want to make sure that we got to the questions that at least that have been submitted before we began.
Sure.
We'll stick with broker-dealers. And you knew it was going to come. So you talked about the inspection program, the fact that it is an interim program. So any update on the status of the interim inspection program for the auditors or broker-dealers?
Yeah. The way I would describe it is that it is certainly a priority at some point for the board. Looking at our first 10 months since we've been reconstituted, we've obviously identified other areas that were higher priorities. Not to say that the broker-dealer, looking at and evaluating it as a permanent program is not a priority, but it's something that we're going to assess moving forward. The way I would like to describe it is that it is in eyesight, is something that we need to look at some point.
Great. And then auditors of small businesses, and you touched on this when you talked about one of the 4 priorities for the board and the strategic plan on standards, but I think it's important, and you talked a little bit about it. But the question is, how do you try to work the balance so that the standards are scalable for smaller firms? That might not be the big 4 and have offices in New York and Washington and around the country, but really when you're writing a set of standards, how can you try to ensure some sort of scalability and make them relevant for smaller firms?
Yeah, I do think we spend a lot of time around what I call the infrastructure question, and certainly I've been immersed over the last 10 months in terms of what that looks like, across, whether it's a G&F firm or, NAF firm or even smaller. It's the bottom line is that, if our standards do more harm or not implementable because, you're in a situation where a small firm does not have the resources, where the conversation tends to gravitate to is a lot of technology. For instance, if you don't have a robust, IT infrastructure, for instance, why would you put a standard out there for smaller firms to adhere to when we would know up front that probably is not a workable, standard to put in place? I mean, there are other considerations, but the one that tends to come to mind mostly is the one around how much a particular firm, based upon size, would invest in a certain amount of technology.
Yeah, and that's something that you think about as a board member as you're
absolutely
working through not only what the priorities are, but sort of how we're going to be implemented and how it would impact different firms, different sizes.
Yes.
Good.
And staff. I mean, if you, how many partners? If it's just, one partner, you may want to rethink about, think hard about what the impact of that standard would be.
Yeah, good. I'm getting the signal that we've got about 1 minute. Well, I guess we're 1 minute over, but that's all right because it's been worth it. And Tony, thanks a lot again.
Thank you.
We do have one more administrative matter to take care of, which is CPE, of course. So the second code you need for this session is 892. 892 there. And that's it. Tony, thanks again.
Oh, thank you.
It's been great.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Ken.
you taking the time. This is one of the great benefits of the board. As I said at the outset, deciding to go back to a live format, trying to get back where we can do the necessary outreach to auditors of firms of all sizes from all around the country. So appreciate you giving the green light to do this again, and certainly appreciate you taking the time and effort to come down and join us. And I'm sure that everyone else enjoyed it as well. So with that, thank you, Tony. We will be back at 12:30 Eastern time, so we'll have about a 28-minute break. So thanks again.
Oh, thanks.
Thanks.